Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode, Mohamed Kamara, edge rusher out of Colorado State. We're going to be evaluating him based on his production profile and other statistical factors. Kamara was a Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year last year. Also was, of course, All Mountain West in 2023. And he has an interesting production profile that I think deserves to be mentioned. There are some questionable things in terms of his age, his level of competition, and stuff like that. But I do think he's worthy to be mentioned in this particular draft class, with especially how weak the edge rusher class is in terms of certain players, especially the players that are hyped up the most. So taking a look at defensive market share data. So if you're new to the channel and new to the stuff that I do, I look at defensive market share data. Defensive market share data, it basically takes a raw statistic divided by the individual, or I should say it takes an individual statistic divided by the team total statistic, which is then transformed into a market share score, which is measured against positional peers, to give you a market share score, if you will. So from 0 to 100. So instead of saying, oh, he had 25% market share, and here's all the players that tested similar that had that same thing. No, I take that number, I compare it to all the players to give a score, and then that's the score that I use in terms of my evaluation of them. So instead of saying his Z-score, or he's 4 standard deviations above the mean, I'm just giving them percentile scores. And when you do that, you get these numbers right here. So 90 plus percentile is where you really want to be in terms of all pro players, because the averages at the all pro positions, which is 3-time all pro players since 1989, was in the 90 plus percentile. When you look at the Pro Bowl area, it's 80 plus percentile, and the starter area is starter, because as you can see, there's a correlation. The higher you produce, the more likely it is you're going to end up being a All-Pro, Pro Bowl player. I mean, it makes logical sense, and that's what the data shows. And when you look at Mohamed Kamara, he had 70 percentile in terms of solo tackle data, 90 percentile in terms of sacks, and 80 percentile in terms of tackle velocity data, which are good numbers to have. Another interesting thing about him is he also had some decent forced fumble production data, 70 percentile in terms of that particular metric. His pass deflection score, though, was in the 40 percentile, so not as good, but this is still a good profile for him based on his overall market share data. Now, moving on to adjusted production scores. This is what really hurts Kamara the most, and this is kind of the opposite issue. So I know I've been talking about a lot of edge rushers on this class, where I talk about the fact that they have bad production, and then I look at their adjusted production scores, and they're still bad. But this is kind of showing what adjusted production does, because adjusted production looks at their strength of schedule, strength of team, and their age to kind of see how productive were they for their age, how productive were they for their level of competition, and how productive were they for the team that they were on. How productive were they for the team? And this is kind of the opposite area, where you have a guy who actually tested pretty well, but when you look at his MSA rating and his pass rating and his age, they kind of lower his overall outlook. So when you look at Kamara, he's not quite near the All-Pro averages in terms of his adjusted production scores. He's not really near the Pro Bowl averages or even the starter averages in terms of his overall production scores. Is above the Pro Bowl threshold and the All-Pro threshold and the starter threshold, but again, not necessarily in every single metric. And that's kind of the biggest issue with him, is his age lowers his production. His level of competition lowers his adjusted production score. And this kind of shows you that even though he was more productive than a guy like Jared Verse, or more productive than those other types of guys, he played at Colorado State. So that's definitely going to affect his numbers compared to, if Jared Verse played at Colorado State, he might have put 90 plus percentile scores up there. But then you still have to adjust for his level of competition. So this is the biggest thing to kind of point out with Kamara, is his adjusted production. When you look at guys who tested similar to him, these are the types of guys that are there. Larry English, Darius English, Grant Hunter, and then Thomas Incombe and Ryan Lacasse are the main guys who tested similar to him. So not a lot of interesting names to really point out or kind of point to say he's going to be a starter. But there are some interesting kind of rotational pass rushers here. Kamara profiles as a backup to spot starter long term. The biggest weakness in his profile comes down to his age and his overall production profile. There have been some analysts, I'm not going to name names, I'm not trying to call anybody out. They've tried to compare him to Shaquille Barrett, but the problem is Barrett had 90 plus percentile production at Colorado State in terms of most of his production traits. And he also had a decent age as well. He had a much higher MSA rating. So he was able to kind of rise above his level of competition because of his age and because he hit really high-end production numbers at Colorado State. Kamara is, again, an older prospect who didn't hit the same types of numbers that Shaq Barrett hit. So I don't think that comparison is warranted in this case because they're just different prospects. Yes, Kamara was very productive, but he wasn't Shaq Barrett productive. So there is a chance if he tests well that he could become a starter, but the profile like this usually becomes a backup. So again, I'm not trying to deflate anybody. If you're a big fan of him or you think he's like a sleeper and stuff like that, I definitely think he's a good prospect. I think there's a chance he could become a starter. But I think that his overall production is closer to, say, a backup when you look at his level of competition. If he tests well, it might nudge him more towards the starter potential. If he doesn't test well at all, then you might have to take him off your draft board entirely. But that's are just my feelings on him overall in terms of his production profile. So, of course, my name is Jim Coburn. You can check out my other work at Geometrics, at Jimetrics. Also, check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/jcoburn. And I will see you guys in the next one. Peace!